What's up, weirdos, and welcome to day 2 of my 12 days of horror. My name's Felicia, and if you like horror stuff, go ahead and hit that little subscribe button and we can hang out all the time. And for day 2, it seemed right to go ahead and talk about the Black Christmas remake from 2006. So this remake is set in the modern day. It's more of a horror comedy and has like 1,000 times more blood and guts than the original. They also give Billy a backstory in this one, potentially to make the audience more sympathetic to that character. And he basically has the worst childhood ever, like the most cringy, like even for a horror movie, cringy, scary childhood. Something I loved about this movie is they just like fully went for it. They went for the blood and guts, and they also went for the Christmas. They really capitalized on the Christmasness of this movie in a way the first one really didn't. This one has stabbings via candy canes, Santa costumes, and Christmas cookies that definitely are not made out of cookies. I'll talk about that later. Now, there are a couple things I don't love about this movie, and I think part of it is because I watched this directly after the original Black Christmas, and so there was no way I wasn't going to sort of compare the two versus judging this one as a standalone movie. But here are a couple things I didn't love. One, the characters. So the sorority sisters in this one are a lot more shallow and just sort of mean girls. They even have Gretchen from Mean Girls as one of the characters. Like, I mean, come on. Whereas in the first one, all the sorority sisters are like really smart and like badasses, and they're not sort of that like stereotypical sorority girl that's normally portrayed in movies. They're really just sort of more well-rounded women, whereas this one, they really go for the stereotype of the sorority girl. And it stinks because whenever a movie goes into stereotype land, you always end up caring less about the characters, and so when they're sort of picked off, you're like not as affected by it. Whereas in the first movie, I was like, oh my god, these girls can't die. The second thing they do bad is they try also to do like a sort of a fake out in this movie that just is like so poorly executed. They had this one character come in for like literally one scene, and then I think the audience is supposed to think that they're sort of behind some of this, and then you immediately see them dead, and that's like the only arc for that whole fake out sequence. And I was like, oh, you could have done better than that. And the only other real problem I have is that it has basically 2 endings, which I always just am annoyed by in horror movies, where it sort of ends and you're like, oh, and then they have a whole other hospital sequence that I just am not sure we necessarily needed, or maybe it should have been shorter, I'm not sure. But it did give us one of my favorite deaths of the movie, which I'll get into in the spoiler section. Let's talk ratings. For the scare, I'm giving it a 4 because this movie was pretty over the top scary, and I think a lot of the scare in this one really comes from like shock factor and gore more than anything else. And for the gore, this baby gets 5. This is a gory movie. Oh my god, I have never seen so many eyeballs being ripped out in my life. That's just like a big theme of the movie that they use a lot. But the deaths in this movie are really dramatic, really gory, really over the top. So if that's not really your thing, this is probably not the heartwarming Christmas tale for you. And for the cheese gets a 4. It's pretty cheesy, and a lot of the lines are just like, the line deliveries are just like outrageously bad, like shocking. And I also thought they went like a little far with Billy's backstory, where I was just like, I just don't need all of this information. And yeah, so the cheese gets a 4, mostly because like the acting and the lines were just kind of bad. So for my overall, this movie gets a 3. I had a great time watching it, though I think they did rely a lot on shock factor and gore to get through the movie, where they could have used a little bit more of relationship building in like an honest way versus just like a backstory way. But overall, I had a good time watching it. So I would definitely recommend it to you guys. Let me know if you've checked it out and let me know what you thought below. And yeah, now let's get into some spoilers. Okay, so for favorite death scenes, I actually have 2. One being in the second ending of the movie in the hospital, where Billy falls off this thing and then is impaled by a Christmas tree. Just, that's art. Like everything, like that part, that one image, I was like, wow, this sort of makes up for a lot of flaws in this movie. That's hilarious. And then the second one is Michelle Trachtenberg's death, who of course you'll know from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She plays Buffy's sister named Dawn. Her death, I think, is the most creative. Basically, a ice skate is thrown to her head and it basically scalps her. And I was like, whoa, that's creative death right there. And for this video, I'm also going to include the scene I will never forget, and that is when Billy makes Christmas cookies out of his dead mother's flesh and eats it with a glass of milk. How do I get that out of my head? It's stuck in my brain forever. Please help me. It's horrible. And that's it, guys. That's it for this video, and I will see you tomorrow for day 3 of my 12 days of horror. Have a nice scream. Bye!